Welcome back again to the Spurs Insider Podcast. We are here in a very secure sound studio, back with just two members of the round table this week, myself, Mike Finger, and Spurs beat writer Jeff McDonald. We're going to cover some preseason stuff. We're going to cover some China stuff. We're going to cover some LeBron James and Gregg Popovich and Derek White and DeJounte Murray on down the line. To start out with, Jeff, you are about to head out for another preseason road trip. What have you learned about this team so far, a week or so into the preseason schedule?
They're not very good at playing games that don't count.
And is that a source of concern for either Gregg Popovich or the Spurs in general?
Pop's pretending it is, but I don't know how genuine that complaint is.
These games are not on TV, so the people who are listening to this podcast made in the secure sound studio probably are not able to judge for themselves as to whether this is a source of concern or not. So you're kind of by proxy their eyes and ears. So can you kind of let them know?
Not really. I don't know that it's a source of concern. I mean, again, it's just the preseason. I'm making the air quotes right now. I think there are a lot of question marks about this team, and there were going to still remain question marks even if they came out of the preseason on fire and went 3-0 and just waxed everybody. Like I don't. It's just hard It's hard for me and for I think even the coaches to really draw many conclusions from the preseason when you've got different lineups, different combinations, different players with their own agendas, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but some guys are working on getting in shape. Some guys are working on a new move. Some guys are working on a new spot in the offense. Like I talked to LaMarcus, he's really just concerned about his touch around the rim right now, and that's sort of what he's focused on. And when everybody's doing that, it's really hard to really get a gauge on where you stand. I mean, you would feel better if they came out and were just murdering everybody, but I don't know that that would make a difference either.
It's ridiculous to look probably at box scores in preseason games for a variety of reasons, but some numbers that jump out at you that you've kind of chronicled in the newspaper and online is Derek White did not start very well. Is there something to that, his struggles in terms of shooting, or is that just a guy who kind of was busy all summer long and maybe might not be back in the swing of things yet?
I don't know. We'll see, but I mean, you'd like to think he'd be better than 1 of 13 or whatever he was those first two games. Mm-hmm. I mean, he's kind of got it's not a long track record, but he's got a track record that he's been better than that. I think there is something to the fact that he was busy all summer playing in China, and maybe there's a little fatigue factor. He's back on the bench now doing somewhat of a different role than he filled for most of last season when he was their emergency starting point guard. So I think all that stuff together, and I think, we even saw it a little bit last year. He's just sort of a streaky, inconsistent young player, and I'm sure there were stretches last year where he was 1 for 13. We just didn't notice them because they weren't the first 2-3 games that we saw him.
Right, and I do find it sort of compelling that this is what Popovich has chosen to do with him in terms of this guy who, when he made his breakout, and we call the early part of that Nuggets series kind of when people around the league noticed who Derek White was the start of that Nuggets series. He was starting, and he was able to kind of take games over. Now Pop is kind of asking him to become, obviously not Manu Ginobili, but that mindset of a guy who comes in and provides energy, minutes, production off the bench, and that can be a difficult thing for veteran players to do who are used to starting, and I assume it's probably kind of a different attitude or mentality adjustment for a guy like Derek who, like I said earlier, he made his impact starting last year. Now he's going to be asked to do something different.
Yeah, and he's been kind of, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but jerked around. Like he was this is what he thought he was going to be going into last season, and then he wasn't for injury reasons, and then now he's back to doing what he thought he was going to do last year, but that he didn't do last year. So it's all just kind of a mind meld there.
Do we care that DeJounte Murray and Derek White have not played together in the preseason?
Do I care? I mean, I'd like to see it. It's surprising to me that we haven't seen 1 minute with those two playing together. I get why you don't start them together, but I do find it surprising they haven't logged a minute over the first 3 games together.
the last Spurs Insider podcast we did. And by the way, subscribe to our Spurs Nation newsletter. You can get all your updates from Jeff and Tom Orsborn and everybody on what's going on every day. You can get that at expressnews.com. The last Spurs...
Always be selling, man.
The last Spurs Insider podcast, we mentioned that it might not be a bad thing to always have either Derek White or DeJounte Murray on the floor in terms of having that guy who can defend and play the point guard position, do that kind of things. And that's kind of what Popovich has done so far this preseason. But to your point, that lineup with both of them in it does provide some things that could be positive for this team. And I think we're going to see that eventually.
I mean, you made the Manu Ginobili comparison, not comparison, but, you know, with Derek White earlier. And, one thing we all remember is that just because Manu Ginobili came off the bench, he was closing games with Tony Parker. I think at some point maybe you'd like to see that. Again, there's some offensive issues you'd have to iron out if those are your backcourt guys. But
other issues to get through and kind of quandaries to sort out. You've mentioned on your Twitter feed Lonnie Walker. And a lot of people, for a couple of years now, the fans have been really interested in that guy because he's one of the highest picks they've had in a while. And you watch him play for a few minutes and you see potential. You see athleticism. You see him do things that...
Activity.
You see activity. He's still maybe not in the first two rotations. Will he get there? And kind of how is that going to all play itself out?
Well, I'm not the coach.
You speak more than the coach does, and probably are more willing to speculate than the coach is.
Like you think it'll work itself out. I don't know, but you're right. Right now, he's over the first 3 preseason games. He basically seems to be behind Marco Bellinelli in that guard rotation, which I think a lot of Spurs fans will probably find disappointing. Mm-hmm. I'm kind of on your side there. Like I'm
Meaning you're on the fan side there.
Fan side, yeah. I've seen enough of Marco Bellinelli to know what he is. That said, you sure have a lot of guards like Lonnie Walker, like Derek White, like DeJounte Murray, like DeMar DeRozan, who are just slashers who slash and don't have a lot of range beyond 18 feet. So I can get the appeal of having someone that does something else in your rotation. And if you're going to make for the umpteenth straight year, Pop is talking about wanting to shoot more 3-pointers this year. If you're going to do that, you have to have 3-point shooters on the floor. Mm-hmm. So I get the appeal or why it is how it is right now. That doesnof mean the fans or I have to like it or like watching it.
Have we seen any better 3-point shooting acumen from any of those slashers that you just mentioned so far this preseason?
I mean, the guy that's knocking him down is DeJounte Murray, but he can't make like almost anything else. It's kind of like bizarro DeJounte.
In a way, that's not terrible. Like if he can just make the threes, like you don't need the mid-range stuff from him when you have all the other mid-range guys available. So I mean, if DeJounte is just going to be a guy who can hit an open three, I think they'll take it.
I'm not sure he's really going to be that.
Right, but it's at least somewhat encouraging that he's made a couple.
Yes, sure.
Sure. Will it come from DeRozan?
It doesn't look like. I mean, again, we're going off 3 preseason games, but it doesn't look like it. The only 3 DeRozan I think has taken from 3-point range this preseason. He was fouled on. I don't know what Brandon Ingram was doing there, but he did get 3 points out of it. So
speaking of that team, this was your first Zion experience. What did you make of that?
Man, he's really interesting. Like you don't see a lot. That kind of movement in that kind of package very often.
Those of us who follow basketball, like especially at the college level.
Those of you?
Yeah.
As opposed to those of me?
I'm just speaking in the royal we. Have been aware of this guy for a long time. I mean, he went to 1 year of college and now has not played an official NBA game yet. But when he was in high school, he was this legendary guy. I mean, he was like a YouTube sensation, and people were excited about what he was going to do. And there was this criticism of, these shots that he's getting in high school, he's never going to get in college, like in the ACC. And then he goes to college and he gets all these shots. Like he's able to just score at will at point blank range. And well, that's great now, but he's not going to get him in the NBA. He's sort of still getting his shots.
So far, yeah. So far.
And maybe it won't happen in a playoff series against, against the Clippers with Kawhi and Paul George and all these guys around, but he's able to get his shots.
It probably matters that he can't shoot worth anything, but not it doesn't 100% matter.
And to be clear, he's not a terrible shooter. He made open three-pointers at Duke. I mean, that's not a big part of his game.
I guess the game I saw the other night, he didn't have to take those.
Right. And that's a special skill. I mean, to be able to get what looks like garbage buckets. I mean, even in NBA preseason games, they're not just there for the taking. You kind of have to have a skill.
Here's a dumb question. He's left-handed, right?
Yes.
Okay, see, I think, so some of this, I don't want to take away from him, but, there were a lot of moments the other night watching him, oh, yeah, they forgot he was left-handed because they were guarding the wrong hand.
People did that occasionally against Manu Ginobili in year 29.
It's one thing that the great Jakob Poeltl said after the game is, it'll get a little easier to guard him once we've seen him more than once. It's sort of like seeing some crazy pitcher for the first time. And I don't know that easier is not the right word. I don't know that mean it gets easy, but once you remember things like, oh yeah, he's left-handed, you have a little bit of better chance.
Speaking of the great Jakob Poeltl, he and DeJounte Murray have a deadline coming up, correct? In terms of
sure.
Is that going to happen?
Yeah, I'm not the GM.
Again, you talk more than the GM does. You're more likely to speculate than the GM is. Is that a priority to get both those guys? Because if you don't sign them to a contract extension now, then they could be restricted free agents next summer.
I think you generally extend them. I mean, that's generally
both of them.
That's generally been the way those things have worked for the Spurs, unless it's somebody that they don't really have a long-term interest in.
And both of those guys probably fit into long-term
plans. Right. I mean, yeah. And there have been some times you didn't offer Corey Joseph back in the day because you knew coming up that was going to be your big free agency this summer, and you didn't want him tying up. So it kind of depends on what you're looking at as far as cap goes down the road and what you want to do with it.
And Poeltl's been starting preseason.
Yes, just like he did at the end of last season. Mm-hmm. That seems like Pop's going to ride or die with that, I think.
It could change within that week.
Sure.
But that's probably how they're going to open is with Bryn Forbes as your 1 3-point threat, not a starting lineup.
And the two bigs. And as somebody pointed out, they open with New York, who has 100 power forwards, so it's not the dumbest thing in the world to start that way.
Right.
But Pop wants to play two bigs for as long as he can, start two bigs anytime it makes even a remote amount of sense. I think just that's one way of helping out defensively when you don't have the Kawhi Leonards of the world anymore, is to have people that can clog the paint. So I think that's part of it at least. Also, let's be honest, I think LaMarcus likes it. He likes not
pretending that he's a 4.
Yeah, and this is not a criticism, but he likes not having to do all the little dirty work stuff, and he can just focus on being LaMarcus.
Right. We've talked a lot about stuff that Pop has done that he's always done, kind of the same old Pop. But there was a first this preseason, the first time the president has ever mentioned Pop by name, and Pop kind of had to. Pop was asked about that. What did you think about his response to that? And were you surprised that that this finally happened?
I was surprised it took so long.
Yeah.
Like our guy in the Oval Office takes shots at everybody who blinks at him wrong, and it's been 3 years, and it took 3 years for him to get to Steve Kerr and Gregg Popovich, who have been sort of open season on him since inauguration.
My theory on that, we've discussed this before, and this is not me being a political commentator in any way.
Don't want to get political here.
I'm just saying that the president tends to react to things that are discussed on Fox News.
Exactly.
And I'm not sure that Gregg Popovich and Steve Kerr have been on Fox News very often in the past. It's been more of an ESPN thing.
That's true.
So maybe this last round kind of caught his attention.
But that was the lady from Will and Grace on Fox News. Did she raise to that level? Because I don't.
Maybe it could also be his Twitter feed. I don't know. But I think we've known for a couple of years now that there was going to be a time when this was going to come into his field of vision, and that eventually that he was going to discuss this. And I thought it was funny in a way that he takes the shot at Steve Kerr, calling him what a little boy, and still says and almost has this begrudging respect for Pop. Yeah. I don't know what that is. He says he didn't look as scared, but Pop almost got a little more respect from the president than I thought he would have. It was kind of fascinating. And then Pop obviously didn't offer that back. But I do want to get into what precipitated all of this, just because, not because it's a fun thing to talk about, and not because I'm not just absolutely sick to death of hearing you or watching you talk about it to people with 30 followers who keep baiting you. But on the Popovich thing, and I'm not going to ask you this question. This is my soapbox here. It's fine that like Gregg Popovich doesn't have to talk about China if he doesn't want to talk about China. I don't think that invalidates anything that he said about all the topics that he cares about. I'm not going to sit here and say because Gregg Popovich does not speak about human rights violations or about pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong, that invalidates anything that he said about other things in this country. That's fine. He doesn't have to do that. But I do think that it's a bit disingenuous to call Adam Silver courageous. Like, I think that's kind of absurd. Adam Silver is not... Everything that he's done over the past couple of weeks has been with the interests of the NBA in mind, and it should. Like, I don't think Adam Silver's a bad guy. He's stood up for progressive causes in the past. That's great. I think he has his beliefs, but he's not courageous for correcting the NBA's just atrocious initial reaction to the Daryl Morey tweet. Eventually, Adam Silver sort of got it right in terms of saying we stand up for free speech. But this is not Adam Silver. Adam Silver is not Rosa Parks here. You know what I'm saying? And if people want to say that Gregg Popovich has not come out strongly enough for pro-democracy protesters in Hong Kong, that's their right, and I don't think we need to bag on people for saying that. They like I've written before, the NBA asked for all this when they decided to do business in China, just like Marriott asked for it, just like Google asked for it, just like Apple asked for it. All these companies that decide to do business in China, you take with what comes with it, and I don't know. I'm rambling there, but I don't blame Popovich for not talking on it. I don't blame him for all the comments that he's made over the years that he believes in. And I don't blame Adam Silver for anything that he's done other than the first reaction, which was way too apologetic towards China. But I just think it's kind of, this story's going to last forever if we keep arguing about it. And I just think it's fine if people want to kind of call out Silver, Popovich, LeBron James, all these guys. It's kind of deserved in a way.
There's a lot to unpack, and I'm just distrustful of anyone who thinks it was strident about anything, like that they have the answer and the other side is wrong. Like it's just way more complicated than that. And as for Silver, it's all relative. Like he's not Rosa Parks, he's not charging up Bunker Hill, but eventually he got around to saying more on the subject than the CEO of Marriott ever has, or the CEO of Apple, or anybody from Nike.
Kind of because he was backed into a corner.
Well, I don't care what the motivation is at the end of the day. I'm agreeing with you in part. I think courageous, I don't know about disingenuous, but it's over the top is fair.
Yeah.
But again, it's all relative because he's said more on the subject than, to my knowledge, any other CEO that does business in China.
All he's really said is we stand up for our employees' rights to free speech, which is great. Now, if some middle manager at Marriott had sparked this and Marriott was losing billions of dollars, would that employee still have his job? I don't know.
I would doubt it.
I would doubt that any middle manager at Marriott could spark international outrage. That's all I'm saying. It's kind of a apples and oranges. The reason that this is a story in the NBA is because the non-CEOs have such a platform. You've never heard of the guy at the Gap who is the equivalent of Gregg Popovich or Daryl Morey.
And that's the other part of the story is I don't know how they Morey I do, but how the other guys necessarily get dragged into this kicking and screaming. It's not their job to be speaking on this.
And to your point, this is where that's disingenuous criticisms comes from, because the people who are asking them to talk now are the same ones who told them to shut up and dribble, blah, blah, blah. We know that. There's certain people I would say a great number of people on both sides who are making arguments that are not really about what they say they're arguing about. Like the people who want Pop to talk on China don't really want him to talk on China. The people who want LeBron James to come out and in support of the Hong Kong protests don't really want him to do that. They're just upset about everything he said before. That being said, what LeBron James said on Monday night about coming out kind of criticizing Daryl Morey, I thought was one of the worst things he's ever done in his career. I thought that was just, I mean, he had more than a week to think about what he was going to say, and he comes out and basically says that Daryl Morey was misinformed and shouldn't have said this, and that's fine if he thinks that privately. And if he wants to argue about whether Daryl Morey was misinformed about the China subject itself, he insisting he just meant he was misinformed as to how it was going to affect the rest of the league. Either way, it's a ridiculous stand to take. Like, if you feel like Daryl Morey should have shut up, keep that to yourself, because this only makes you look worse.
Well, this is my point. Like, we're clamoring for these players to speak on this, but is that what we really want?
Right.
Like, we really want to force, like, I almost hesitate to say this because it paints with way too broad a brush, and I don't know all these guys personally, but they're not geopolitical scientists.
Nor are we.
You know what I mean? Like,
yes.
you're, and like, they don't, what am I trying to say here? Like, I'm trying to walk a minefield here without.
They probably should. I mean, it's totally understandable if they want to stay silent on this.
Right.
It's fine.
Well, look,
because the people who are telling them that they should speak on this, like, aren't going to be satisfied with whatever they say. So let the certain fans, certain outsiders, certain critics call them hypocrites. That's fine. In a way, the whole league is hypocritical for choosing to do business in the places they've chosen to do business, just like lots of American companies, just like lots of American consumers who buy these products.
That's really the conversation.
There's a dose of hypocrisy to everything.
Yes.
And so, like, if the choice that LeBron James and Gregg Popovich and James Harden and Steve Kerr up and down the line, if it's like either stay silent and let people criticize me, or keep the conversation going and possibly make it worse, like, it's probably easier just to dodge it. And that's not courageous either, but it's probably good business.
Right. Well, these guys, they speak out on Travion Martin and Michael Brown because, again, I'm painting with a broad brush, but they've seen that.
Right.
They've lived it. It jives with their experience growing up. And now you're sort of forcing them to talk about an issue that I don't think many of them really understand. They haven't studied centuries of Chinese history.
I agree.
And Chinese dealing with China has been normalized in our society. Like, as far as LeBron and these guys are concerned, this is a place where they've been visiting since they were teenagers, since they were 20. Nike takes them there. They go there with their shoe company, does business there. Their team does business with them there. The NBA does business with them there. They go there. FIBA is going to put the Olympics there, and then the World Cup. So they don't see it as some. And right, I'm not excusing it. I'm just explaining. I don't think that they see it as some big red menace, and so they don't really understand what they're. It's not like. If they were being asked about going into business with Al Qaeda or ISIS, they would. No one would support that. You know what I mean?
Okay.
But
we're getting off on quite a tangent here. My point with you is here, and this is the real talk section of the Spurs Insider podcast, which also is to help promote the Spurs Nation newsletter, which you can subscribe to at any time at expressnews.com.
Do you think anybody subscribes to it in China?
Maybe.
Should we be doing business with China?
That'd be.
I'm not. Wait, never mind. I'm out of this.
We're anyway.
Yeah.
My point is, like, these arguments that you're making.
I don't want to cost us tens of dollars
with people who are screaming into the void of Twitter where no one is listening to them except for you. These people have like six followers.
I got spare time.
These people have 6 followers. Like, you're not going to change their minds, and B, you're sticking up for a league that probably doesn't deserve.
Sticking up isn't the right word.
You kind of are.
I take umbrage, sir. Umbrage.
The arguments that you're making are fine. Like, yes, these guys have the right to speak on what they want to speak of, whether it's LeBron or Pop or whoever. But like you're not changing anybody. No one's mind is being changed in any of this.
So why do we talk about anything? Nobody's mind has changed about anything. Why do we even have a podcast?
Well,
what is life?
People might be listening to have you change their minds on DeJounte Murray.
Nobody's changing their mind on DeJounte Murray and Derek White either. Those are as entrenched as anything.
I think some people.
I don't think so.
The point is that this is I just don't see the upside of defending, of sticking up for LeBron James or Gregg Popovich or Adam Silver or the people who say they should shut up. I don't want to stick up for them either. I think it's just a situation that is obviously complicated, obvious, and
that's what I've been saying. Just it is what it is. Like you can have your little outrage. I'm just outraged at the outrage.
You shouldn't be. That's my point. Don't be outraged at the outrage is ever present. Outrage is omnipresent. It's there. Your outrage is kind of absurd. Anyway, that's what
I'm
we
never
have.
Coming back on this podcast ever again.
Well,
I've been mishandled like Avery Johnson.
I think that
I will not be mishandled.
Avery Johnson would be probably a better guest, but we will probably be back in this secure, soundproof studio for another Spurs Nation podcast on a regular basis again, probably every week or so. We have season opener coming up next week. We could begin.
Where's Tom, by the way?
Tom did not want any part of having you yell at him about signing.
He's a coward.
Okay.
He's a coward.
I think he's courageous. Until next time.